Hello, everybody. My name's Ian Werkeiser, and I'm presenting a paper entitled The Shape of Welfare, Using Precision Livestock Farming to Promote Value Pluralism in Animal Welfare. Now, there are many ethical concerns for animals in PLF that are already being discussed in the small but growing body of literature on this topic. This includes the loss of relationships of care between farmers and animals and the way that affects both the animals and the farmers' lived experiences. The objectification of animals by reducing them to a bunch of data and the way that that might lead to reduced levels of care, and technical requirements in order to use PLF that might limit movement or free action by the animals in order for them to be within the sensor range, which could cause stress, or preventing good kinds of stress by not allowing species typical behavior. And there are others, but these are just some examples. Now, some of those ethical concerns, I think, can presumably be addressed by research and technological development as the technology improves. There'll be less of an issue as research about PLF and when and how best to use it. A lot of those animal welfare concerns will reduce. However, a remainder is going to remain due to the contested nature of animal welfare. So, for example, how ought we to measure and assess animal welfare? That is less a technical question than a values-based question. Likewise, what an acceptable level of animal welfare looks like isn't amenable to solution by further developing PLF, right? That's a values-based question. Or what our ideal goal instead of a minimum goal, what an ideal goal of animal welfare looks like. These are all complex questions, but the one that I want to focus on in this paper is what even counts as welfare increasing or decreasing. Right? What do we mean when we say animal welfare? This is a contested topic. It's not obvious. And there have been a lot of attempts to try to say, let's not fight. Let's throw in every concern we have for animal welfare into like one thing and say that all of them are equally important. You're all equally beautiful children. So we don't need to play favorites, right? A common one in veterinary discourse is called the three domains of animal welfare. They describe that as the body, so thinking about mortality, trauma and harm to the body, growth and development, infections, things like that, but also the mind. That includes cognitive measures of experiences like pain, so not just damage to the body, but like experiencing pain and other kinds of suffering, including frustration and stress. Bad stress, but also, allowing for good stress too, like the stress of working hard or chasing something or being curious. And then also the nature sort of concern for an animal welfare. This usually includes species typical behaviors and that allowing animals to engage in those. For example, for chickens, nesting, wing flapping, turning around, so not making the cage too small, dust bathing, perching, potentially engaging in social networks with one another. So forming hierarchies within a flock, things like that. The thing is, though those attempts are nice, those conceptions of animal welfare aren't just different emphases that you can always pursue equally, right? Sometimes they're in tension with one another, and sometimes they're literally mutually unrealizable. To increase one is to reduce another. So, a couple of common examples. One is the question about whether or not chickens should be free range and allowed to go outside and explore. If you do that, you are increasing their exposure to disease and to other physical harms. You're increasing their exposure to predation, which obviously could kill them potentially and is stressful. But to not do that is to deny expression of species typical behavior. Likewise, questions about knocking out genes that lead to the production of stress hormones in pigs. Doing that is like literally altering their nature, but doing so in order to reduce experienced stress when in confined areas with lots of other pigs that they don't know. Now, these don't always come up because, as I say here, given the poor welfare conditions of many animals in livestock farming today, whatever your emphases, whichever way you prioritize these different conceptions of animal welfare, whatever your values are, it's likely that there are important changes that everybody can get behind, right? That we can all applaud. And it doesn't really matter. We don't need to examine how we disagree with each other, but those disagreements are real. But I think, and I'm arguing in this paper, that PLF actually suggests a way forward rather than trying to realize everything equally to come to a kind of value pluralism where we see these tensions and have a tool for discussing them and thinking through them. So there are two trends in PLF technologies that I think allow for this. One is the ability of PLF to track individual animals, even in very large livestock operations. And another is to store and use that data, because it's digital, in many different places, quite disparate locations, instantly or near instantly. These two trends are often discussed in the literature when talking about safety and traceability. So, for recalls or disease prevention among animals or other public health concerns for humans, the fact that information about particular animals, where they're from, how they lived, which other animals they came in contact with, the fact that that can be done at the individual animal level, and then that can be tracked and used all over the place by many different people, is seen as a way to address these public health concerns. But I think it can also enable a representation of welfare conditions of the animal behind the products in every sense. By knowing the animal's background, by tracing whether or not they were able to go outside, what kind of food they were given, were they kept on a 24-hour light schedule or a different light schedule, did they have disease, did they ever have any injuries, you can generate a report card of the different sorts of welfare and how this animal's life sort of achieves in all of them. I don't literally think a report card is a good idea because a report card can lead people to want straight A's, right? Or, I mean, that might just be me, but I think for a lot of people, they're like, well, I want A+ in every single category. A better representation of that might be a multi-axis spider chart, or sometimes called a radar chart, as you see below here in the slides. Those radar charts, those multi-axis charts, can generate recognizable polygons, which means that, for example, consumers could look at a carton of eggs and see a shape that they are particularly that's important to them, right? Because the particular kinds of animal welfare that really matter to them, because they like free-range eggs, is maximized. You're looking for a particular curve here, even though that means, a reduction towards zero of a different axis of, exposure to potential harms, disease and predation. And in fact, by positioning different variables across from each other, in opposition to each other visually, it helps communicate the tensions and trade-offs that need to be made when thinking about welfare. Now, of course, a lot of objections immediately come to mind when you think through the use of these, shaping of welfare using PLF. Animal rights activists might object in general that animal welfare is just a cover. If you believe in animal rights, there shouldn't be any animal products in the food system at all. And so thinking about welfare is just sort of a distraction. The response to that, I think, is that although, whether or not you're right, it's the case that it's an independent question about how animals currently in the food system should be treated now. And that matters to the lives of millions of animals. Even if you think that, we should move towards a world where no animals are in that food system, they can still be treated better or worse while they are. Another objection might be that there's too much here function on consumerism. If I'm just talking about generating polygons that are on meat in the deli aisle or milk in the dairy aisle, that's implying that, by purchasing the right products, we can make changes, and this is also a distraction. The response to that is that if consumers see that it's impossible to maximize certain kinds of animal welfare that matters to them in any of these products, perhaps because of the nature of the way the food system is run currently, or large livestock operations, that can push you to say, buying, there's no way for me to buy the thing that I think is ethically good. So I move naturally into policy conversations, democratic conversations about politics. Now, consumers, on the other hand, might object that these polygons provide too little information, right? Just a little shape, or too much information, right? I don't want to be thinking about animal ethics every time I'm shopping for milk. The response to that is, for the people who think it's too much information, it's not that much. Just a shape is something that can be, quickly incorporated and thought about. You can just start to recognize these patterns. In fact, I think it's less confusing, is less information than, the green, yellow, red stoplight system of health foods that, is used in Europe. For people who think it's too little information, that could be true, but it's easy to pair that with a QR code for people that want more in-depth analysis. How was this assessment that the shape represents arrived at? What's the confidence interval? Why are these particular things in tension with one another? It'd be very easy to have an app where people could play with it and, say, oh, I want my chickens to be free range and go outside. Okay, I'm going to increase this, but oh, look, this other one is coming down, right? And to delve into this as much as they'd like. Now, objections from producers, on the other hand, might be that gathering all this information is way too much work. And I want to be sensitive to that. I think PLF, as it advances, actually makes, one of the nice things that it makes gathering this information much, much easier than it would be without, but it still might be a lot of work. If it's really onerous, but there's a large market demand for it, it could just be like any of these other schemes and regimes for ensuring various kinds of things that are a lot of work to gather, but consumers want. Organic produce, free range, bird friendly, shade grown, fair trade, all of these sorts of things can be voluntary. People can engage in that process only if they're interested in generating that and getting that consumer market, or not if they don't want to. On the other hand, if we decide, because those animal rights activists I was talking about earlier in this list decide that it's important to get this information, that we ought to care about animal welfare, well, then we can make subsidies and allowances to make it possible for farmers to pursue this. Another objection, of course, might be that this information isn't representative or it's misleading, right? This is like the better than organic critique of organic, that people do work that doesn't count as organic, but it's actually even better than that. The response to that is that farmers and people who are trying to pursue animal welfare should be included in the design of these charts, right, of these shapes. And their input should be, new axes, new variables. And as that happens over time, it can be a better representation of the different kinds of animal welfare that people are pursuing. And of course, I want to acknowledge that there are other kinds of objections here from regulators. How difficult is it to monitor? International trade organizations, how does this affect that? And other groups. And I think a lot of the responses would be along the same lines. I'm happy to talk to you about this in Q&A. But just to conclude, this has a lot of promise to me because these shapes can act as what Starr and Horsemeyer have called a boundary object that promotes and facilitates public conversation between groups with quite different values and concepts, right? It gives people who use the word animal welfare but mean very different things a way to talk through their differences and a way to sort of understand how they differ from one another. It also opens up the possibility of adaptive management so that people can have this shared metric, which they support for private reasons, and we can try to maximize. Maybe, we want all of these shapes to be a bit bigger as we have a more welfare-focused society. And this would be an important contribution for PLF to animal welfare that's beyond the immediate benefits usually discussed in engineering design literature, much like how to make the animal better. It can allow us to have a better conversation to pursue animal welfare in the future. Thank you.